Hey everyone, it's CSG, your local gaming weatherman, coming to you live with another climate report. And just like GTA 6, this video took forever and was probably never going to come out, but here it is. And today, we'll be taking a huge in-depth look at Halo the Series Season 2. About a month and a half ago, I made the Halo Season 1 climate report. I highly recommend you go watch that first, so you have some context on my previous opinions of the show when going into this season. Anyway, Season 2 of this show wrapped up about 2 hours ago as of starting the script, so my thoughts are relatively fresh. And listen, y'all, seriously, I do love the Halo franchise, and it's because I love the franchise that I hate the show. However, my review of the final episode of this season is 100% worth sticking with me throughout this video to see because I think you'll be astounded by my thoughts on it. But that will come later, and it is juicy. I hate being the negative Nancy in the room. Truly, anyone familiar with the channel should know I'm always trying to stay positive and hopeful for things, especially anything Halo related. But unfortunately, I cannot with this one. There are some things I really enjoyed, and I will definitely discuss them, especially the final episode. And another thing, just because I don't like this show personally doesn't mean you don't have to. I'm not trying to gatekeep what you like. We're all entitled to have our own opinions, and I'll respect you for having yours. But that doesn't mean we're all entitled to have good taste. Because seriously, I don't know who was watching this show and genuinely thought it was amazing. It is significantly better than Season 1, for sure. If you're going to name something Halo and have the Master Chief be a part of the story, maybe create a Halo-feeling story instead of generic sci-fi crap with a Halo skin and Halo character names. My thoughts on this show is if you're going to create a separate timeline for the franchise in order for this show to exist, then that is absolutely fine. I don't mind that. That is, if you're going to at least create something equally great to the original timeline story. I can't stand seeing the alternate timeline argument, as if that's an excuse to enjoy the show or an excuse to call the show great. I'm going to use my argument from my review of Season 1 again. The whole Silver timeline was only created so that it can excuse the garbage writing, and I think we should all know this by now if we don't already. Let's now dig into each episode, and you'll then understand my frustration from the deviation of the original timeline story and this show's own story by itself. There are some good things in here, like I keep saying, I promise. Anyways, grab your emotional pellet and your best friend Quan Ha, and let's dive right into this thing. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong timeline. Hang on, y'all. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can find it. Ah, there it is. And here you go. Episode 1, Sanctuary. Following the raid on Roscotzko, which was the planet during Season 1's finale, Jimmy and Cortana are surgically separated in the opening scene of this season, which I still can't understand why she was drilled into his brain in the first place, but whatever. Anyways, 6 months later, Silver Team is sent on a mission to evacuate residents of the planet Sanctuary from the Covenant, who resist until the Covenant begin glassing the planet. After Jimmy rescues a Marine named Talia Perez from a squad of elites, in a pretty cool action sequence by the way, Silver Team then narrowly escapes the planet with a handful of survivors while watching condors blow up from the glassing beams. If this entire opening scene was indicative of what was to follow, this season seriously could have been something. Because it was, for the most part, a very good opener for the season. It was entirely better than the first season in only like 16 minutes or so, aside from maybe this first season's action sequences. Later on, at the infamous Reach City, the city everybody loves, Silver Team meets Oni operative James Ackerson, who's probably the best part of the show. He ends up being Halsey's replacement in overseeing the Spartan 2 program, which is very familiar to the actual canon, so I do give credit here to this season. Ackerson questions Jimmy about his experience on Sanctuary, expressing interest and concern over the potential lingering side effects from having Cortana implanted in his brain and surgically removed. After he dismisses Jimmy's concerns of the Covenant's changing strategies, this is in regard to his concern that they glass Reach next, Jimmy then secretly meets with Perrin Goski, of all people, and she tells him that she was discharged from Oni after taking the fall from Halsey's actions in Season 1. There's also a really weird and cringy Blade Runner scene here where Master Cheeks goes to an AI-operated spank bank to therapeutically help himself in regards to, I think, missing Cortana or McKee. It was either or. It could go either way, but the show doesn't clearly make it known to the audience on who he misses. Meanwhile, we jump over to a really awful scene and plotline that is basically plot B for the rest of the season, and we start it on the rubble. During a really stupid scene of some clown woman teabag riding some jail jock's body, which, by the way, she'd never be able to take that guy on in the real world or even in this one. But that's modern writing for you, I guess, where we have to suspend our disbelief and believe that somehow this small woman can take down this tank of a man with brute strength and no technique. Anyways, that's a whole different discussion of mine. This is where Soren takes interest in some kid from Harvest, which, funny enough, is the first planet humanity encounters the Covenant in the mainline lore. It is presumed he is, for the sake of YouTube TOS, an indentured servant, who claims to have seen Halsey, which would not make any sense, but Soren continues ignoring his wife, and he purchases a servant in hopes of capturing Halsey, but he is instead led into a trap and arrested for piracy and treason, which you could see coming from a mile away. This scene finishes and we pick back up on the rubble, having survived Madrigal's destruction by the Covenant because apparently off-screen the planet was glassed. Everyone's favorite character and the best character in the show is now revealed, and that is Kwan Ha. Love seeing her back, that's for sure. At least this time around she has a nice haircut and is better to look at. She apparently has been living on the rubble and has befriended Kessler. The episode ends with her telling him stories about the monster, who the audience can only presume to be the Flood, which we'll definitely get back into later on in this video. The first episode is very mid. It was more interesting when we were following Jimmy and the Spartans, but once it's cut away from that plotline, we start seeing cracks in this show's storytelling yet again. And I think the real omen in this show, both season 1 and 2, is that it has way too much filler on stuff no one asked for or cares about. I am sure there are somehow a few of you out there though. Anyways, let's press on. Episode 2, Sword. We pick back up on the rubble. Kwan escapes the grasp of several bounty hunters that are twice her size, and she is somehow just throwing them around like she lifts 300 pounds on a light day at the gym. More on this later, actually. We cut to Laura yelling at Soren's crew for leaving him behind and sets off to find him as her insecurity on the rubble rises. We then cut back to Reach City as Cobalt Team, another Spartan fire team, is sent on a mission in Silver Team's place due to Ackerson's misplaced reluctance to trust Silver Team. Jimmy tells Kai that he saw McKee on Sanctuary. Oh yeah, did I not mention that yet? No? Okay, well, McKee is somehow alive, especially after taking a sniper bullet to the chest, which I'm pretty sure is a 50 caliber. Jimmy then pushes Silver Team to train harder. This puts strain on Riz, who is recovering from her injury when she was blasted by plasma at the end of Season 1. Ackerson reveals to Jimmy that Perez did not corroborate his testimony of what happened on Sanctuary, which raises Ackerson's distrust even more. Jimmy then confronts Perez, who expresses her guilt and admits to not telling Ackerson the full truth while they're at Perez's house. And her family asks Jimmy what his KD is, which is such a lame attempt at making a video game joke regardless of the context. Anyways, Ackerson, who is holding Halsey captive, which we find out later, she's in a simulated room and they're using Cortana to help simulate any impending threat, telling the audience that Ackerson has known the Covenant would inevitably come to Reach. Cortana was for some reason given an entire makeover. I don't think she looks as good as her previous Season 1 counterpart, but the voice didn't change and that's all that matters. After Cobalt Team fails to return from their mission, Jimmy figures out that they were sent to Visegrad Relay, a communications tower on Reach, which we should all be familiar with because that's where Noble Team was, sent in the first mission of Halo Reach. Convinced that the Covenant is on the planet, Jimmy gathers Silver Team and goes AWOL because everyone just loves when Master Chief goes AWOL. Kind of like how it was really successful in that plotline that was Halo 5 and Halo Season 1. Anyway, they all head to Visegrad, and meanwhile, at Sword Base, which was criminally underused as a major place of the plot, due to its importance in the games at least, we're introduced to a new Arbiter named Var Gotnai or something like that, accompanied by, lo and behold, McKee, which basically confirms for sure she's alive. He takes out a squad of UNSC Marines in the dumbest scene I have ever witnessed in anything ever. The sergeant literally sends 2 squads of Marines in the dark with no flashlights in the 25th or 26th century separately, and then proceeds to be surprised when they all die. And then he dies. And then the Arbiter and McKee recover the large keystone thing that was the dumb plot MacGuffin of season 1. This episode really sucks because it's mainly nothing but filler, unless we're with Jimmy and his team. Also, some really stupid decision making was made by almost all of the characters in this episode, and it really continues to put a shine on terrible writing. Definitely a disappointing episode when episode 1 was at least decent. We now move on to episode 3, Visegrad. Silver Team arrives at the Visegrad relay, but who's waiting for them? The Maniacal Covenant? Nope. Somehow, Oni operatives, probably the most boring plot twist to happen. This part really made no sense to me, but again, whatever. These operatives detain them, despite Jimmy's insistence of Covenant activity there on Visegrad, and they head right on back to Reach City, which is a major slap in the face for us viewers, as we waited an entire week to find out what will happen at Visegrad, and the answer being literally nothing. Time to go back to where we started. This was seriously so lame and such a blue ball slap in the face to us with what could have been really dope. Admiral Jacob Keyes then scolds Silver Team that they are suspended from combat and that Jimmy is to undergo psychiatric evaluation. The UNSC's best soldier and asset is now recommended to seek psychiatric help. You can't make this shit up, but somehow they did. Jimmy escapes this direct order and rendezvous with Parangoski again, for whatever reason, where the Covenant ramen meme was made. This leads to a really cool plot twist where Parangoski is actually still with Oni. I actually kind of enjoyed it as it's very deceptive and feels like something an Oni official would have done in real lore, given the circumstance. Then we cut to Ackerson showing Keyes the bodies of Cobalt Team, who were killed by the Covenant on Reach. We never got to see that, which would have been really cool. And he's furious at Ackerson and Oni for their cover-up. Keyes enacts the winter contingency, which was very cool to hear in the show, as it was a declaration also made in Halo Reach by Colonel Holland, I believe. This is the declaration that evacuating and defending Reach is top priority above all else. This goes against Ackerson's nonsensical plan to secretly transport essential assets away without informing the public of the planet's doom. I really don't understand the lack of communication from him to the public. It shows a cowardly and very deceitful position of his character, and something that would go against Ackerson from the mainline canon's character. Ackerson, as we know in the main canon, might not be a good guy, sure, but even he wouldn't shoot this low of a blow to humanity on Reach. Ackerson then bids farewell to Halsey before departing the planet. He reveals to her that his sister, Julia, was the clone that Halsey's been talking to in her imprisonment throughout these last 2 episodes. She was a Spartan 2 candidate, but died during the augmentation process. This is actually what was supposedly fueling his hate for Halsey, which felt okay, I guess. Ackerson then introduces Soren to Halsey and locks them in together, and then he helps his elderly father commit, for the sake of YouTube TOS, self-death to avoid capture or slaughter by the Covenant before boarding a spacecraft and leaving once and for all. This scene with his father actually resonated with me and was very well executed. It gave Ackerson some depth and was a very dark and methodically written scene. I give this episode props for that one. Meanwhile, we cut to everyone's favorite character, Quan, who protects Laura and Kessler from Soren's mutinous crew that has been building up to this tension in the past few episodes. Quan then kills all of them somehow when they threaten to kill Laura and eject her out the airlock, though Kessler is separated from them and is off to another planet. We finally cut back to a church where Jimmy finds Perez, who explains she has somehow translated a message from the Arbiter that announces the Covenant's intention to destroy Reach. Before explosions rock the planet and we cut to black, which insinuates the fall of Reach has begun. Honestly, this episode wasn't half bad, and I actually enjoyed almost all of it, except the Quan Laura Kessler stuff, which will be a recurring plot point I hate throughout this entire season. I really enjoyed the setup to the fall of Reach. The plot points here that are related to it felt like they were building tension for the most part in a fairly decent way. How Perez can translate Sangheili is beyond me, but somehow she did it, and though that part was very stupid, what the Arbiter said was pretty cool. However, I still think Master Cheeks shouldn't be deemed a demon by the Covenant until he destroys the first Halo ring, which is the main reason they call him a demon in the first place. This brings us into episode 4. Probably the most divisive episode I'm going to review yet. I have got a lot of thoughts on this episode, some good, but a lot bad, sadly. Reach is one of my favorite stories in mainline Halo and sci-fi in general, just due to the sheer amount of despair and defenselessness humanity went through when they lost the planet in both The Fall of Reach by Eric Nyland and Halo Reach in 2010 by Bungie. This is probably your favorite story too, and for that, you have great taste, my friends. So let's dig deep. We pick up immediately after episode 3, with the Covenant's invasion of Reach beginning. Jimmy and Perez witness her family being killed by plasma bombardment after escaping the church. This scene was pretty cool, as it establishes the realism of what is happening now and the lack of ability to get what is unfairly taken away back, such as Perez's family. We then cut to Halsey and Soren, who are now freed from their cell when security for the Oni detention facility deactivates. They find Cortana's containment room and witness McKee capturing Cortana's data chip, which, sure, I guess, doesn't make sense. We then cut back to Jimmy and Perez on their way back to the FleetCom HQ, and they run into Riz along the way, as well as Lois and his spouse. Lois is a disabled Spartan who was helping Riz discover another way to live her life outside the military, just another little minor subplot. His spouse is then killed in the fighting, and Lois sacrifices himself to destroy a Covenant Wraith attacking the group. While a pretty cool scene that is reminiscent of Emil's death, it was a needless death, as we, the audience, and the Spartans in the show should know how to take out a Wraith with relative ease. But I digress. Anyways, the remaining survivors manage to reach FleetCom HQ, where the dumbest plot point in the entirety of the show's existence is now revealed to us, the audience, and to Jimmy and Riz. Vanek reveals that their Mjolnir armor was taken during Ackerson's evacuation, and that Kai is now missing. This is beyond such a stupid plot choice. In Season 1, it was a meme where Master Cheeks was born. Master Cheeks barely wore his helmet, got butt naked, and even had coitus with a war criminal. Something that is so destructive to his iconic character, and now ultimately has no armor to wear this season, which really shows that the writers just don't want to pay to homage to his character's appearance and the fans of the show or franchise as a whole. This plot point creates a false sense of credibility for why Jimmy can't wear his armor anymore and must move forward without it. It feels entirely forced just for the sake of a reason as to why he can't wear it, and I think it's very dumb, as it is the one instance where we would at least expect him to wear it. It's the Fall of Reach, for Christ's sake. In fact, the majority of the time throughout the season, he never wears it. He's almost always out of it every time we see him. I really feel bad for the Practical FX team who created these suits. There's an awesome video with Adam Savage that came out before this season, who does an interview and deep dive with the team who made the armor. It seems to me that they really made it special and custom for Pablo Schreiber and the team, and after all their hard work to make him look cool and be comfy, the writers pay them back by having him barely even wear it. If I were on that production team, I would have been very disheartened to see a suit I put tons of hours of work into just to barely ever see it on the big screen. I can't speak for them directly, obviously, but that's how I would have personally felt. At least they were paid. We cut to Keyes informing Jimmy of High Command's intention to abandon Reach and the truth behind Cobalt Team's status at Visegrad Relay. He apologizes to Cheeks for being wrong, gives an actually pretty awesome speech that was reminiscent of Johnson and Captain Cutter, and basically tells the Marines to go to war. Jimmy then goes to the fight, and Keyes leads Halsey and Soren to an evac shuttle where Perez is helping civilians aboard. The hangar comes under attack by jackals, which seems to be the only enemy we ever see from the Covenant aside from the elites and one brute. We don't even see the prophets again, which feels very weird since they were introduced in Season 1. I would have loved to see more of the Covenant side of things in this story rather than Kessler and Quan. Where are the hunters? Where are all the grunts? Where are the brutes? Beats me. I know we get one brute, but that's it. However, in this scene comes the next laughably stupid decision they have ever made in this show, and that's to have Keyes sacrifice himself to allow the evac shuttle to escape. He whipped out a pipe, which was pretty cool to see, says, "Got a light?" then f***ing dies. If this was any other character, this would have been a really cool scene, but unfortunately we now get no Pillar of Autumn, no Keyes Proto-Gravemind, and no Rescue the Captain mission for a Season 3 if they decide to even make one. Anyways, Silver Team is then ambushed by Covenant forces in a hallway led by that new Arbiter. Jimmy is about to sword fight the Arbiter, but then gets blasted by a plasma pistol, which takes away what would have been such a cool and possibly iconic scene. This would have made me love this episode way more than I did, but sadly he gets wounded and this doesn't happen. The Arbiter's about to slice his head off, but Jimmy is then miraculously spared by McKee, who orders the Arbiter to not kill him, which was also very idiotic. She should not have been able to have that much leadership power over an elite with a sword at Master Chief's throat. On top of that, the Arbiter, no matter how special this human was, would never listen to a human in this manner. With Master Cheeks out of the fight for now, Vanek attempts to kill the Arbiter with the Needler, but is impaled and killed by the very Needler shard he got off the Arbiter's chest. Vanek dies by Needler's Super Combine, which, again, makes no sense, as the Needler's rounds need to accumulate to a certain potent level in order to explode in Super Combine in the manner that they do. So the fact that he exploded only after one doesn't make sense as a fan of the franchise or even as a fan of the show. In Season 1, we literally saw a Marine on a Warthog turret get blasted by a bunch of Needler rounds, and he doesn't explode until multiple rounds impale him. This was previously established in the show itself. That's how a Needler works. You have to get multiple rounds into someone for a Super Combine explosion. So Vanek's death also felt very forced to me and is stupid as well. This really sucks because aside from the bird thing in this season, Vanek is the only one that feels and looks like a Spartan. I'd say this episode is awesome because there's a lot of action, and honestly, yeah, I am to a degree. However, the entire Fall of Reach is about 30 to 35 minutes long, with the other amount of time being people talking in a room. Also, we never see the entire planet fall. We only see 30 to 35 minutes of action sequences take place in multiple hallways, and then boom, it's over, Reach falls. 30 to 35 minutes of action sequences versus 7 to 8 chapters of a book and an entire video game dedicated to the Fall of Reach. All this time that could have been dedicated to fleshing out the Fall of Reach was instead dedicated to Quan and Kessler's stories. The Fall of Reach was the selling point of this season, which was advertised to be the main plot point and focus of Season 2, to which it was delegated to 3/4 of one episode. I am very disappointed in this episode. It's not that they entirely mishandled how the planet falls, but it happens way too damn quick, when the audience needs to see it fall and feel it fall, and be able to digest what is happening at a slower rate. We as the audience need to see how humanity struggles to fight an overbearing force, which we never do. This episode and season does a terrible job pacing such an incredibly rich story. I had such a high expectation for this episode, and unfortunately again, they dropped the ball. Still one of the better episodes out of the season and series overall, but very disappointing. Let's press on to episode 5, Alaria. With what was a slightly decent episode with episode 4, this is probably the worst episode in the series so far. The episode begins where we left off. Silver Team is cornered by a brute with a gravity hammer who drops in through the ceiling, and it's the only brute that we see in the entire show. Quan and Laura somehow miraculously, for the sake of plot convenience, knew exactly where and when to rescue the team. Quan kills the brute with a light machine gun and is somehow able to fire that thing at full auto with no recoil or kickback, yet can barely dig a grave for Vanek later on in the episode, and somehow was able to deal with those bounty hunters in that fashion that she did, previously discussed from episode 2. Where all of her sudden strength came from, I will never know, and neither will you. Riz then directly runs into enemy fire to recover Vanek's body, but is shot and knocked out. Jimmy saves both of them and they fly off the planet. Jimmy witnesses Reach being glassed by the Covenant before falling unconscious. While he's unconscious, he remembers that Cortana agreed to do something for Parangoski in exchange for saving his life. We then cut to everyone's second favorite character, McKee, now disillusioned with the Prophets and having stolen Cortana from the UNSC and Oni. She attempts to enlist Cortana and the Arbiter to go rogue and find the Halo ring themselves, which they end up doing. While Cortana initially refused, she then shows the Arbiter John's memory of his vision of Halo, convincing the Arbiter to change his mind and not kill McKee to take her to the Prophets. We then cut to the stupidest waste of plot time in the whole season, which is on Alaria days after Reach fell. Halsey's operating on Riz. There's a lot of exposition dump here, and stuff I wasn't intrigued by, but it happens anyway. Having suffered significant damage, Riz decides to stay behind and find a normal life on Alaria, which, whatever, good riddance. Now Riz and Vanek are out of the show for good. We then cut to Soren and Laura seeking out Kessler, only to discover that he was taken by the UNSC. Moving on, after some initial disagreement between Quan and Jimmy, a crematory funeral for Vanek is held. Jimmy swears to hunt down Parangoski and Ackerson, ignoring Halsey's request for him to focus on finding the Halo ring instead. Quan then has a vision of the Sanctuary Shaman, who's the dumbest and most misplaced character from episode 1, who we saw walk straight into a Covenant glassing beam, who somehow warns her that the monster is coming closer through an almost Force-like vision like in Star Wars. The whole mysticism of this series is so misplaced and stupid. If this was a Destiny TV show, it would feel more in line with that universe of the games, but this is Halo. Religion has always had an importance in Halo, sure, but only from the fanatically religious Covenant and their side of the story, never from the human side, and especially never in a magical way. So to argue that this mysticism and space magic feels in line with the games and franchise as a whole is a very lazy argument and completely misinformed. Because I was seeing people argue that it's well in line with the mainline canon, to which it absolutely is not. But I digress. We then cut to the final scene of this episode on Onyx, where we finally see Kai meeting with Ackerson and preparing to lead the Spartan Threes, kinda like Kurt from the mainline lore. This change I didn't mind at all. If they want to make her more like Kurt from the original story, by all means, go for it. That's fine by me. Now we move on to episode 6, Onyx. The gang is finally all together, and Jimmy, Halsey, Soren, Laura, and Quan land near Oni's secret headquarters on Onyx. Jimmy serves as a distraction, taking on Oni forces and willingly being captured before fighting through in an attempt to confront Perangoski and Ackerson. This allows Soren and Laura to search for Kessler at the Oni training facility designed for children to become soldiers. Meanwhile, Quan and Halsey enter a Forerunner cave. At the end of the cavern, they run into a science personnel led by Miranda Keyes. She's finally reintroduced. It's nice seeing her character again, but felt very weird and a little too convenient. Meanwhile, Perez, now a Spartan 3 trainee, which absolutely makes no sense and it's such a face slapper. It breaks the entire backstory of Spartan 3s in mainline lore. For those who don't know, most, if not all, Spartan 3s are orphans from planets and societies the Covenant destroyed, that are taken and trained at a young age, similar to Spartan 2s, to become the new generation of Spartans. Perez argues with Kai over their training simulation being too easy at the end, because when their objective is complete, there's no Covenant. This insinuates that the Spartan 3s are only to achieve their objective, but not meant to survive, which reinforces the expendability of their existence, which is actually a really cool plot point that I liked seeing them flesh out a little bit more. Then Kai questions Ackerson about this. He reveals the partial truth about Reach to her, but he tells her Jimmy is working for the Covenant and is alive at the facility. Kai confronts Jimmy as he's making his way through the facility, who reveals to her about their teammates' fates and Oni's attempt to sabotage them. Though Jimmy allows Kai to beat him up on Ackerson's orders, he reasons with her to reconsider Oni's narrative and go against Ackerson. This scene was kind of just whatever, I didn't like it, but I didn't dislike it at the same time. Aside from the fact that Kai should never question Jimmy's allegiance or actions because she's never been given a definitive reason to think that way, it happens anyway, I don't know. We then cut to Cortana contacting Perangoski and providing data on her location, and simultaneously leading Jimmy to the smaller Keystone, still in UNSC possession. Meanwhile, on the Arbiter's Corvette, a Covenant priest named Udo Mdama, who's presumably related to Jul Mdama, detects Cortana's transmission and orders the Arbiter to execute McKee. But he and his loyalists slaughter Mdama's assembly instead, protecting McKee as she reaches for their captured Keystone. Right as she touches it, we cut to credits. This episode was okay. I think we spent way too much time seeing Jimmy being beaten up by Kai, when in reality she'd never do that. I think it goes completely against her character. And in addition, at the end of the episode, when the elites have a really awesome sword fight sequence, you only see it for about 5 seconds because the cameraman decides to focus on McKee crawling in the forefront and elites fighting in the background, when in reality we should see the elites fighting in the forefront and McKee crawling in the background. The choreography, from what we could see, was totally badass, and someone obviously spent a lot of time and hard work on set creating and performing the choreography. So to not be able to see that was a real sin, especially when it's elites fighting elites with energy swords. Such a cool concept we've never really seen before, killed by such stupid camera work and directorial decisions. But overall, the episode was okay. We now move on to the season's penultimate episode. Episode 7, Thermopylae. Jimmy and McKee, after having touched the keystones from the previous episode's ending, share a vision of the Halo ring and discuss their different beliefs. After being pulled away from the vision, McKee fights and defeats the elite priest, which I didn't mind. We gotta progress the plot somehow. And while seeing him was cool since we've never seen an elite like that before, he was ultimately just a nuisance. With the assistance of Cortana, McKee and her determined Halo's coordinates using what I only assume to be some sort of star map from the Keystone, but it's never explicitly stated how they figure it out. They just say something about a void, and that's it. We then cut back to Kai helping Jimmy subdue the soldiers sent after him, and they go off to find Ackerson and his armor. Meanwhile, Halsey, Miranda, and Quan investigate the ancient ruins of Onyx, which Halsey believes were built by those who built Halo. The Forerunners, obviously. Quan unlocks the doorway into an ancient laboratory, which I believe is hinting at the Forerunners' development of a cure for the Flood, just based on the environmental storytelling of this scene, like the Guardian and Flood symbols on the door of the facility, but I could be wrong. While there, they discover the remains of a Forerunner scientist and a city which looks really cool. It looks like the guts of a Halo ring, or maybe the inside of a shield world like from Halo Wars. The CGI team made it look really dope. Made it have a great aesthetic from Forerunner structures that we have seen in the games, and overall just more believable quality CGI. The three are then forced to leave with a device containing the scientist's research. This helps Quan realize that the monster in her visions is real, again, presumably being the Flood. Give me a few minutes and we'll get to this. This is probably the coolest scene in the entire TV show to date, because we're digging at aspects of real Halo lore that actually matter in the grand scheme of things, regardless of timelines. However, there is one thing in this scene that was off to me. How were they able to access the lab and then have it close in on them after a short amount of time? Wouldn't the lab just refuse to open if the Forerunners wanted to keep it secret and locked away? Especially if it's a Flood repository or library? Especially if it does happen to be related to the Flood? I'll look past this plot hole for the sake of the very cool storytelling they had here, but overall, it didn't make sense for them to be able to access this. We then cut back to the worst plotline in the entire show, where Soren is locating Kessler. He finds out where he is, but then after all of this searching throughout the season, immediately debates on whether to leave Kessler and keep him there to figure out for himself who he is, which is the stupidest and lamest waste of time and the most unbelievable decision making by Soren, as in the very next scene he's fighting to get him back. And in the Ilaria episode, he was talking to that family about how he would do anything to anyone to get the son back. This was a seriously, ridiculously dumb, stupid, brain dead lapse in judgment for his character, but mainly the writers, who just made an obvious throwaway of dialogue for the sake of time. It really struck a nerve with me for some reason. However, Soren is overwhelmed and loses sight of Kessler and Laura in a chaotic fistfight. Cutting back to Ackerson, he discovers that the true intent of the Spartan 3 training simulation is to cause a nuclear reaction capable of destroying an entire star system and even Halo itself, something that was instructed by Parangoski. He even confronts Parangoski about this, but she doesn't care and threatens him. He defies her and she orders guards to imprison him. Before that happens though, he does warn Jimmy and Kai about this. Kai decides to go with the Spartan 3s anyway, while Jimmy goes by himself to find the ring. Finally, after almost an entire season of no armor, Jimmy finally gets his armor back and steals back Silver Team's Condor and travels to Halo's location. I don't really understand how he just flies there, as he didn't have the coordinates. I think I may have missed something in the dialogue for Cheeks in order to have that, but whatever. I know Parangoski was given the coordinates by Cortana on the down low, but how did Jimmy get them? Because he never talked to Parangoski, and maybe Cortana gave them to him and I just missed it. I'm not sure. Regardless, he gets there. And when he gets there, the UNSC and the Covenant are engaged in space combat already. He looks up and the camera pans to the Halo ring and Jimmy's reaction to seeing it. It then cuts to black. This episode again was just okay. The laboratory hinting at the Flood was very well done, but it's just a setup for the finale, which every TV show does, so I can't really be too mad. The tension aside from Kessler's story is really good, and the hinting at the possible side of the Flood is very promising. This is the best plotline Quan has ever had in the show. Surprising, I know, but the aspect of the Flood is just, it's always such a cool plot device. And yeah, we cut to black and it brings us to the season 2 finale, episode 8, Halo. We get to, by far, the best episode. The episode opens with Jimmy going through some evaluation or discussion about his mission to the Halo Ring, and he's talking to someone. We'll get to this later because it's kind of cool. And Miranda poking around the flood spore that was in the Forerunner device that they recovered from the laboratory, trying to figure out what it is. The flood spore takes control of a woman named Janine, and she kills one of the fellow scientists in a really stupid sequence with really bad jolly music playing. And I know it's supposed to be ironic or humorous, but it really fell flat for me. This one flood spore took over the entire Onyx facility in a matter of minutes. Ackerson is imprisoned next to Kessler and Laura, and Soren and Quan come to save them. Normally I would be bored from this plotline, but they're actually fighting prepubescent flood combat forms, and it actually makes their plotline bearable. We jump back to Kai and the Spartan 3s taking control of a Corvette. They're fighting elites and grunts. One even gets shot by a grunt on a turret, which was very funny to see. It reminded me of Cairo Station in Halo 2 when the little guys would start firing from them and you had to take them out. Jumping back to Jimmy Rings, he debates on whether he goes to the ring or to the fleet to help Kai. I don't like the fact it took him this long to debate on what he wanted to do, and the coin flip he did was extremely silly. Well, he ends up doing both because he can. Honestly, this episode's so much better from start to finish. However, it feels incredibly rushed. The plot of this episode should have taken maybe 2 or 3 episodes to fully flesh out and show off, but at least Master Chief actually starts acting like Master Chief in it, and finally wears his helmet for the first time, which is very refreshing to finally see. So for this episode's sake, I'll call him the Chief. Finally, I know, right? Anyways, Kai and the Threes are surrounded and out of ammo. They're about to be overwhelmed and killed when they start firing at something else in the smoke. Lo and behold, it's the Master Chief. Excellent choreography here, and he kicks some serious squid face ass. He saves the Threes and Kai. He tells them to get back to their ships, but Kai stays behind. We cut back to the Onyx facility where Halsey is now in the control center with Parangoski, begging her to tell the Chief to get on course to the Halo Ring. She instead tells him to get to the Corvette, instead having a feeling he's after Cortana. So she goes against Parangoski's orders and helps Chief complete his own mission before getting to the ring. This was a kind of a cool scene. It really reinforces Chief's relationship to Halsey rather than Parangoski. We then jump to Chief as he's flying through space to the Corvette. He gets on board, retrieves Cortana. She's in his armor now and not his head, thank God. And finally, they crash land the carrier into the Halo Ring. We cut back to Ackerson, Kessler, and Laura, who are about to be consumed by the flood in their prison cells, but Soren comes in and kicks its ass. He gets everyone out of their cells, including Ackerson, and they begin fighting their way out of the facility. Juan is abruptly surrounded by many flood hosts, and one of the few things I really hate about this episode happens here. The flood quite literally stops as the ghost or spirit or whatever it is of the mystic woman from the first episode is somehow briefly controlling them, I think. She tells Quan all sorts of things about what the flood is, and then says word for word, they are the flood, giving us a confirmation name drop of humanity's greatest threat. Everyone from Soren's gang makes it out, but as they are escaping, Laura locks the door behind them, revealing she has been infected by the flood. Soren is left broken and confused, and honestly, the scene was a bit predictable, but it was very well executed nonetheless. We then see Kai fly the Covenant cruiser head first into the supercarrier, blowing it up and completely destroying it, giving the UNSC a significant advantage in the fight. With the sacrifice of Kai, she kind of went out like George in Halo Reach. We then cut back to the Chief waking up on the ring, finally as a lone Spartan, and heading for one of the spires we are all too familiar with in the games. It's a little different in appearance, but it is very memorable of the first mission on the Halo Ring from Combat Evolved. McKee and the Arbiter are about to activate the Forerunner device when Chief interrupts them. Remember that sword fight we got blue-balled on earlier in episode 4? Well, here we finally get it, and it is very well done, I must say. It's very reminiscent of the package sword duel from Halo Legends between the Chief and the Elite. The Arbiter gets the best of him, destroying his chest plate, which now looks very much like the broken chest plate from Halo 3, and he cracks his visor, which is whatever. Chief is very pissed off now, and I kid you not, begins to fight the Arbiter with the grapple hook, which was such a cool way to see it be used. He ultimately comes out on top, as we all know he should. Unless it was Velvatimy's Arbiter, then there would have been a great debate on who should come out on top. He then tells McKee not to make any harsh decisions as she wants to activate the ring and start the galaxy anew. Chief says he can't let that happen, so he and Cortana activate the door and head inside to chase McKee down. We cut back to Soren and his group getting on their ship escaping. Whilst they're escaping, we cut again to Miranda and Halsey. Halsey is intrigued by the flood's presence and significance to humanity. Miranda isn't as excited or impressed as we all should be, seeing how deadly they are. Halsey stops moving and talking, and it is revealed that she was infected by the flood at some point, most likely when she was tackled. Miranda locks her way into a cryopod, hoping to stop Halsey's flood infection progression. I'm not sure if this is how it works in the mainline lore, but it was cool to see anyway. Then we cut back to John sitting in the dark, like how he was at the beginning of the episode, which I said we'd get to. And who's he talking to? Turns out to be none other than who we can presume to be 343 Guilty Spark, or at least one of the ring's monitors. He sounds very different, so he could still very well be a sub-monitor of the installation, but as far as I can tell at the moment, they're insinuating that it is 343 Guilty Spark. This could change later in Season 3 if they decide to make another season, but I couldn't find him credited as 343 Guilty Spark, so it was hard to know definitively. The Halo theme plays, and we cut to black. Holy shit, this episode was worth the price of admission, and it really should be reviewed on its own merit because it feels completely different than anything else that has come before it in this show. The episode was pretty cool, and I won't let it blindside me to the fact that the rest of the season was shit. I just wish we got more of this instead of the schlock we've been force-fed the last 2 seasons, because this episode right here is precisely what I want to see in an alternate timeline. It creates a spin on what we know that has been previously established in the real lore. We could get rid of McKee and Quan, and it would be even better. But still, even with those characters, this is how they should be utilized, at least only for this final episode. It is a great episode. This has got to be the largest and longest climate report I have ever created, currently sitting at a whopping 28 pages when the first Halo season climate report was at 17 pages. So I think this is a good place to end the video. So to wrap up this climate report, as always, let's whip out that handy dandy climate report meter and figure out what's a good review of the entire season 2 of the Halo show. I think due to the sheer amount of slog we had to sit through, not only in the first season, but this season as well, and then having a season 2 finale that was actually reminiscent of something we'd see in Halo, I'll have to give this season a tepid rating, which is basically my below average 4 out of 10 rating. It's not amazing, it's not the worst thing on the planet, but it is below average. Keep in mind, I did review Halo Season 1 with a very cold rating, so it's actually 3 degrees warmer than that of Season 1. Will I come to regret this rating? I certainly hope not, but there it is. I am really excited to see where they take this show. Surprising, I know, right? If they do end up renewing for a 3rd season, which at this point I kind of do hope they do, because it feels like they're getting rid of the garbage they've been force-feeding us these last 2 seasons, and they're starting to focus on developing things forward in a more interesting way regarding the plot lines, at least with how Episode 8 wrapped up. I really think Season 2 suffers a lot from the shifts in writers and directors every single episode. The vision felt very fractured because of it, but ultimately it was better than Season 1. There you guys have it, my entire full-length climate report review of the Halo the Series Season 2. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is the longest video I think I've ever had to make, but I had just so much stuff to say about it. If you happen to watch it from start to finish, you have my utmost respect, Spartan. If you wouldn't mind dropping a like on this video and a comment to help it get into the YouTube algorithm, I greatly appreciate it more than you know. Let me know in the comments down below the thing you loved most and the thing you hated most about the Halo series Season 2. I'd love to see what you guys have to say. However, that wraps up this one. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again for watching, and peace out.